5 minutes. 5 minutes.
The 1AC is sent. Just let me know if people don't get it. Fullerton, did you all get the email? Oh, looks like I might have dropped it off. Awesome. Hearing nothing, is anyone not ready to go?
Okay.
Awesome. Okay. Contention. Contention 1 is the geostrategic imaginary. U.S. foreign policy constructs Asia Pacific as a frontier between those linked to collective defense of civilization and dangerous as Turner and 20 the Asia Pacific non-natural entity, Asia Pacific trace 1970 security concerns the geography, the imagination, civilizational values of democracy, and capitalist system required as an extension of the defense because those who seek to threaten the U.S. civilization of America to civilize and the foreign lands have been the expansion of Asia was a logical outcome of Western march to the Pacific of America's fourth mystical frontier. America's identity, fortune, frontier has always been answered for the answers from the nation over the list of losing from the 1884 Washington Jarvis Tangle of the Chinese abandonment the practice considered uncivilized such as quote on trade the treaty go out delivered to made open its force became another height of American power. Japan was geographed in 1898 when the United States became the Philippines from St. Washington colonial flag in 1946. Hands by the ideas of uncivilization onto another the Cold War the permanent military presence in Japan on to Korea, Eisenhower's Korea more frontier of the freedom right population to defend South Korea has yet to be civilized, non-civilized United States routines without the line. Geostrategic mapping joins the islands of the Pacific as a frontier chain of geo-some possession. Islanders bear the cost of American commitments to containment. Davis et al. 20 scholars represent islands of political border between powers of the military shots of dominance in the Pacific around the island chain doctrine of the Asia Pacific, the Pacific, the island chain strategy of the border views on the source of Asia, the island chain strategy protecting U.S. military control of all lines from Japan to the Philippines, the U.S. system to how these islands contain Chinese battles, baseball, holding the freedom of sea communication, supply or orientation, the littoral defense line is dependent on all their settler, their geo for imagination of mention, how the United States made design of the government is one of the affection battle of people on the Muslim between the United States chain, making sure the islands use coordinated mission within dramatically social economic islands and islanders and zero-sum maps reflect a failure to think of IR relationally and narratively. Geostrategic maps tell the story of alliances progressive, coming together, threatened by Chinese revisionist power. Kavatsky in 18 complex tribal lines resonant with global interaction with status arrangement of the federation of yourself, others, enterprise, hegemonic challenger models underpinning binary metadates, IR narrative, powers of Chinese rise of prescribed here to generate form alliance, building military conquest, the alternative narrative nation of the international IRT China is a socially negotiated China's rescue treats the relation out of independence and agonism. Iris launch logical epistemic lack of relationality perpetuates imperial, patriarchal, and racist attitudes. The antagonism global prepared to worse China crisis. The narrative reminds us global life as international factors really find themselves where they get lost in competing geostrategic narratives rely on different strategies, but the same storyline of U.S. civilization, our demand for withdrawal starts, interrupts this narrative in favor of alternative ways of imagining relations. Turner and 20 India appeals to regenerate security conditions in Washington. India from the liberal democratic identity of the United States on rising China was seen as a challenge to regional order. China has been under select such as standards of civilization, democracy, liberty, and capitalism. Clinton explained the pivot was formulated to advance our values. China was not a rise in a distant Pacific, but to the geographic of the American Pacific. Imagine the states of the American self, a fuller retreat from the frontier of the Korean to Japan, Guam could be achieved significant worship of America's all the United States abandoned its military to withdraw would validate others who would challenge the ancient and unquestionable between the United States, Israel, and Japan, South Korea, and its systems have been explored the freedom of the Pacific and first of the endurance of fantasies to American territory. The option of withdrawal from the frontier beyond a mainstream debate, the Asia Pacific and Indo-Pacific and reign, an imaginary geography defined by the twin requirements of boxing, capitalism, and institutionalized networks, domains of networks among them established a military power. Then a military force plays a central role in hegemonic imperialism. Critique of empire must synthesize varying analysis of power. Turner and 20 the United States argued that builds on a former empire with institution rather than the state-centered formation. The notion of American empire often negates the brutality of forces, stark difference in interaction with U.S. power experienced by China. The Philippines and Australia make single uniform destination to analytically problematic establishment maintenance as well as been argued to use material power. They inform use some power that overly myopic as willingness parties such as Japan, the Philippines, of overt military power to be used in mere hegemony to institutionalize form of American power to physical conquest on the global America really, and thus the plan the United States federal government should withdraw from its alliance commitments with Japan, the Republic of Korea, and the Republic of the Philippines. The contention too is the archipelagic imaginary counter mapping archipelagic connections by drawing on anti-militarist and transnational solidarity displaces dominant imperial stories. That's Ida and 20. I propose counter mapping for solidarity counter mapping details archipelagic attention to water not as a maritime expansion of territorial geographic metaphors, the re-ambition of the disruptive hapless rhetoric of land ownership archipelagic with this type of imperial domination. Imagine a card solidarity regimes the archipels nor embedded to a continent by centering them between the continent and the ocean. The only sentence of solution seems to be demilitarization, pacifist diplomacy, populism, organized also going to be anti-militarization, diaspora, surveillance, police brutality, prison, industrial complex dissidents against neoliberals and peers of trans-Pacific, the diaspora and indigenous sovereignties, transnational solidarity, and changing the narrative connections of zero-sum competition help us re-articulate alliance and connection to challenge imperial violence. Scheller and 20 the archipelago, I don't imagine is related with space of multi-imperialism, archipelagic formation, but equally be spaces for counter-imperial alternatives, alternate trajectories and subversive itineraries, indigeneity, locality, communality, more honest struggles against archipelagic spaces, mainly changing articulations of imperialism, coloniality, violence, and occupation by miraging scale connection alliances, resistant militarization, archipelagic spaces, and re-articulate their meanings, calling into question the right of the world's largest military on call into question for it to occupy anywhere. The claimant also a counter arc is becoming fragile if it's extensive power can occupy planetary archipelagos and assess global power fragile fractal counter policy decisions. The small point of friction that generate attention to multi-scale and powerfully magnified calls the question its intimacy, its narratives, the soothing workings. The very small becomes highly significant and counter countermapping, assist counter knowledges and challenges to the dominance of state-based understandings of place and territory in Naputi. And 18, scholars of the reciprocity space are not a backdrop for political and activist but critical percentage of cultural power enslavement. People use Western mapping onto their benefits. Countermapping addresses oppression and oppression of marginalized voices, approaching state techniques of the participatory practices, countermapping questions of discourse, indigenous peoples, practice, rhetorical rhetoric, mapping territorial highlights, rip currents of colonialism, capitalism, urbanism, and plantationism, or mapping challenge cartographic violence and military mass archipelagos and archipelagic perspectives, reroute relations and allegiance beyond the geopolitical and zero sum. We can remap connections in a way that does not negate alterity. That's San Miguel and Stevens. 20, archipelagic calls for rearticulation, transitions, time and space archipelagos are not or natural categories. They can also become an imaginary opacity and translation that work in two sides of the same coin. Opacity index is a difference that cannot be rendered comprehensible. Translation becomes a variety of approaching differences that do not negate irreducible alterity. The archipelagic thought is also practice of rerouting continental frameworks, assume synthesis, unity, and coherence. The archipelagic functions beyond the geographical, geopolitical, and other frameworks, social formations, and our historical experience, which irreducible difference between the norm and the exception. The archipelagic as a framework to theorize multiple historical roots, root teleology, and embracing multifaceted articulation of human experience, and detached observation produces empowerment, collocation of narrative power in policymaking. Authority falsely assumes agent structure binaries. Hackshon and Gulson. 19, the powers of the capacity to produce effects dominant narrative resonates. The exercise of power can be so effective that goes larger in order. Narratives are more persuasive than statistics. Powers of capacity to produce efforts. Theorists disagree about whether or not agents or structures are more important. The agent-centered approach relies on the individual's ontology. Actors and the world possess meanings prior to being narrated. By contrast, actors of the world are giving meaning through narration. This approach is above a narrative ontology, which sees language not merely as a tool for representing, but as a force constitutive of agents and structure that themselves produce their narratives. Traversing the agent to agent structure of binary, the narratives of the rise in China, the Asian Pacific power shift, and the inevitability of future conflict demonstrate how the meme of rule-based order underpins the dominant narrative of Chinese revisionism. The narrative IR research often does the narratives of policymaker, practitioner of politics. We rely on our role of detached observers, the capabilities out there. Foucault problematizes knowledge free of power. The depiction of states revisionist actors are women by academics who typically do themselves the detached and not really describe the world, but participate in its construction. Open for class.
All right, cool. Why do you debate?
Because I enjoy the activity.
Are there any other reasons, or?
Well, there are reasons why I enjoy the activity, but that's the baseline.
Right, that's fine. I don't need to hear those. The app talks about thinking through relations with who?
Well, in the 1AC, it maps the type of relations between different, in our examples, islands in the Pacific. So between people in Japan, the Philippines, and Pacific Islanders, all have this type of relationality that can be drawn through their effects of US colonial domination. That doesn't necessarily mean that those are the exact same, but rather that we should be able to draw counter maps of the way that the US is working in the region, rather than using it in the current frame of just like containing China through things like the first island chain is the way that we currently view those maps.
How does an AF ballot affirm that? Or like, what does an AF ballot do for that?
The AF ballot means that the judge endorses relational IR, so they don't think that relations are static categories, but rather socially negotiated. That is important because the reason that militarism occurs in the status quo is because the United States maps its alliances with the project of containing China. There are other ways to map things. We don't have to map it via the project of manifest destiny. Instead, we should create counter maps that are anti-imperialist, and those forms of relations are incredibly important.
Okay, is it important to have relations to Black women?
Yeah.
Does the AF create those relations?
Well, we can't say we create relations to Black women, but like we do create relations to, we will agree to critique of the idea of a Black woman, okay? But we are making arguments that relationality matters. So there is a relationship between like Black women and other people that is also socially negotiated.
We would also say in the specifics of the project of the 1AC, because we're focusing on the Pacific, then to answer your question, the Black women that reside in the Pacific are in the current countermap of the 1AC. We would also say that one countermap should and cannot be hegemonic, but instead we should continually be remapping in order to ensure that different collectivities can be introduced with relationality.
All right, about the plan, I'm curious, what does the AF do about Duterte?
It does no longer prop up the Duterte regime.
Can you explain the internal link between that?
Yeah, because the United States NDT is what currently allows the United States to funnel
What piece of
money
evidence do you think says that in the 1AC? Can you draw to a line in your EV?
Well,
You can control F Philippines You can read about
No,
it.
it doesn't say anything about Duterte. Where does it say Duterte specifically?
Okay, I got you. Let me control
We
it.
would also say the Filipino government is the head is Duterte. So we would say when our evidence discusses the Filipino government, the logical extension would be that it's discussing Duterte.
Turner 20 also talks about him by name.
All right, that's good.
Okay, the 1 and C said it's just case.
Do you have a preference about which case page we fall on?
Oh, I float all on one sheet, so just flow straight down, I guess. All right, is everyone good? All right, looks like Dartmouth is good. Carlos, Sean, Barlow, Shri, Corey. All right, cool. Black debate is a thing that subtends the alliance agreements of non-black debate. Traditional debate is dominated by white folks aligned to defend their vision of policy debate from insurgent threat of black people saying black things without impunity. There is an ongoing crisis in policy debate, the inability to think black things on the topic, which constantly get deferred to as a non-crisis because of other crises to attend to. Debate, crisis over sovereignty, who will control the ordering of things, produces low-grade counterinsurgent tactics against black debate in order to preserve the integrity of the form of traditional debate itself. By sovereign, we mean all the ways that traditional policy debate is invested in a certain legacy of what is and has been and what it will always must be, a legacy that must be reimagined, rearticulated, constantly reinvented in the ways that render black debate unsovereign, formless, and informal, unable to produce dialogue, unable to produce scholarship about the topic. The topic process is one example of counterinsurgent tactics used against alternative forms of policy debate. Their refusal to talk to black debaters or coaches in the hallways, the sneers and dismissiveness that you teach your lab leader students and that we have to try to undo when they become our students, the unfounded accusations of cheating, the questioning of black people's integrity, accusations of playing the race card to just to win debates persistent, if not constant reminders that black people who want to talk about black things are always not valued or wanted here by a significant portion of the community. Kelsey and all in 12, lack of community discussion is neither random nor power neutral. We have tried to have discussions. These discussions have been regularly derailed in wrong form arguments, and the demand for evidence, the unfair burdens placed on aggravated as a prerequisite for engagement. Read the last 10 years of discussion on debate archives, on CETA forums, and the NDT traditions page. We have been talking over a decade. We have been listening to the liberal modern refrain of we agree with your goals, but not your method. The community seems incapable of producing a consensus responding to what we all agree is a blatant structural inequality. It seems that meta debates discussions about the debate are generally met with denial, hostility, and awe, and more often silence. The silence is in fact focused silence. MPJ produces effects, limits its judging opportunities for blacks, limits opportunities for black debaters to be judged as sex critics. The evaluation of these category marginalized critics are deemed not valuable. It is a system that has long served as a comfortable for the majority of major power brokers. The community pays lip service or simply ignores concerns of those for whom the system is not working. We think this is a question of ethics and a question of pedagogy. It is something that stunts the growth of all members of this community, regardless of identity or social positioning. Resentment, refusing to listen to certain arguments, and even refusing to particular teams, etc., is a reactionary conservatism of black space microaggressions in this activity constantly, consistently. Sometimes it is outright hostility. We are always already uncomfortable in this space and so easily call a community. We are always already aware the community would prefer an empty celebration of diversity without the critical reinterrogation of the activity that our very presence demands. If you are excluding us yourself from us via MPJ on the call, in the hallway, at the hotel, then you should hold yourself accountable, not us. We are not secret. We are not hiding. We are just invisible to you. The misuse of MPJ is the most significant defense fact between traditional debaters and coaches. The lack of transparency in how people fill out their preps provides a cover for anti-black judge placement by some of the most well-respected debate debate programs are the most respectable traditional teams? Where do you prep black judges? How many black judges in your strike zone, i.e. below the 55% mark? We have checked the receipts and looked at all your debates to see who you've been judged by, and specifically who you've been judged by when you debate black teams, making black arguments, which is even more demonstrative of our point. You don't prep black judges. You're looking at your prep. White judges are the only judges with a consistent epistemic authority to fairly adjudicate your debates. The traditionalists in the debate community have pathologized black judges, assumptions of bias, lack of ethics, lack of knowledge, lack of judges' skills, and what they're really saying is black judges can't fairly judge their debates where black people are talking about blackness against white teams. What they are really saying is that they don't know how to persuade black people. They don't know enough about black people, black cultural, structural anti-blackness to feel comfortable in debate. So they avoid the discussion with framework and the refusal to prep black audience of black judges. You fear black authority and you defend yourself against the pathological destruction of black authority as dangerous by refusing the majority of black folks in the debate space and right to evaluate persuasiveness of the discussions of racism. Read Brinkley in 13. MPJ practices demonstrated white people exclude black people from interracial dialogue and debate space. Code switching is an example of our commitment to compromise within debates. There is a denial or disavow even the possibility of engagement across rhetorical differences. How often do we encounter white people who code switch? And no, we don't mean the latest hip hop slang into a community given the socio-political practices of black culture. Double consciousness is something that non-blacks must learn and practice. Their refusal to prep black women above the 55% line as a floor, but preferably at the 20% line, is black femphobia. It assumes that black women do not have the intellectual capability to judge rounds where they are debating, and is emblematic of the fear of the angry black woman, which is why they are so uncomfortable with having black feminine judges in the back. This is Davison Brown in 17. Academic experiences for black female faculty members primarily defined by marginalization is the dearth of black women exposed to them to dangerous racially toxic environments that act as a catalyst from their numerical underrepresentation as well as their invisibility. The result of managing such difficulties can manifest a cultural taxation or fatigue. The through application of the powerful metaphor of driving while black, they describe factors influencing experiences of black faculty in the programs, including lack of respect, having to defend credentials, having teaching skills question and challenging with diversity courses, racialized tokenization and isolation significantly impact experience. Navigating social perspectives for BFF is important due to the pervasiveness and stereotype of being angry black women. Dissent is often seen as complaining, defensive, or intimidating. Marginalization highlight the complexity of being black women in academia and how heavy burdens of cultural and identity taxation both fully represent and likely hazardous of the mental, physical, and professional well-being of the population. The white echo chamber of the majority of the white prep sheet is an attempt to protect and insulate white people from race-based stress. It builds debaters' sense of racial comfort, which can only result in white fragility. It refuses defensive moves like anger, guilt, frustration, claims of innocence, and silence in order, again, to comfort racial equilibrium. Pay attention to the numerous ways in which the AF will deflect attention from their discriminatory practices or the way that they justify this anti-black logic. This is page and all in 18. Yancey 15 describes the whiteness as a racial reality for white people, coloniality, white power, recenter because there is no interrogation of its political affective boundaries. White people live in social environment that protects and insulates them. This builds white expectations for racial comfort, leading to white fragility triggering defensive moves. These moves include outright display of anger, guilt, argumentation, silence. These behaviors resonate white racial equilibrium. This is reflected in the way that discussions around under achievement of black students and students of color is how university continue to maintain claim of ignorance. It simply becomes the fault line of black students themselves. The saddest part of this reality is that black people cannot be the agents of change. We cannot force the majority of white traditional debate community, both coaches and debaters, to choose black judges differently or black women specifically. No amount of talking or engagement over the last 10 years has resolved the problem in how this community constructs resolutions or how traditional teams fill out their press. All we can do is create pressure by making the people risk their universal value in the debate states. That's the ballot. All we can do is apply increasing amounts of political and social pressure, but it will take judges, the power of white judges who recognize what is wrong and done when the wrong is persistently, constantly perpetuated. For any change to occur, it will require for you to surrender to blackness in debate context. That means you are willing to vote for the seating of judges as racially discriminatory process that this team should be rejected for their practices. Rejecting the seating of black judges in this debate, and at the end of this debate, you should ask yourself the following question: who must be systematically excluded from judging on this panel? And for the other team, it means they must make a commitment to end their racially discriminatory judge placement practices and agree to prep all black judges above the 55% line and all black women above the 25% line. It is the bare minimum commitment to necessary, contingent, and material inequality that judges and our competitors have actual power to change. This is Bell et al. in 21. white allies work to discriminate racism in the academy. Whites confronting bias are viewed as more credible than blacks until anti-blackness and white supremacy are treated as defining constitutive features of the academy. The attempts to remedy will hopefully limited and inadequate. We do students a grave disservice by failing to educate them on anti-blackness and sending them into the world ill-equipped to resist the change in manifestation of their lives and organizations. Society, anti-blackness and white supremacy are omnipresent in academia. They exist in the form of every interaction and space, and people are standing by doing the intervene. Allies must be vigilant, on alert, take concentrated collective actions to make visible and dismantle anti-blackness and white supremacy in academia, creating safer, more inclusive, equitable spaces to benefit all. Wait, all right. There's one more card in the file. Actually, no. Oh, here it is. Sean and Shree, this means that you must surrender to blackness, while Corey, Michael, and Carlos, your role is to hold Dartmouth accountable for their refusal to prep the majority of black women judges, and specifically their refusal to prep black women judges.
Cool. Good to go.
Yeah.
You say that you agree with the goals of the 1AC, but not the method. What does that mean?
Well, we agree. Well, I don't think that was ever said.
Yeah, it was said in the first 2 minutes, I think. I have goals, not method.
What do you mean? No, the argument. What? That's not at all what we said. Okay, I guess we agree with the attempt by the app to maybe pref black people, but we think, or no, that's not even the argument. We have never made that claim.
Yeah, I control the F in our doc. We didn't say that.
Okay, well, so there's nothing about the 1AC that you agree with.
No.
Okay. You said that the last 10 years hasn't resolved anything in the debate community, but the ballot is key to pressure us to change. Which is it?
Well, because you should lose. That's why.
Why should we lose?
It's the only method of accountability, because people have talked about this outside debate, which is why Amber is talking about it on CETA forums, on eDebate archives, all of these places where Amber is talking about discrimination due to MPJ. Those things, those practices have been outside of debate. It's only when we have put the debate on the line for traditional teams that they pay attention.
Are all traditional teams the same? So are we the same as Emory, for example?
No, we won't make that argument.
So then
What is a traditional team?
Well, we think there's a difference between obviously what y'all do and what Emory does. We have made specific arguments on the way that you don't pref black women judges, or you cherry pick certain black
Madeline
judges.
And I's fault? Why is it Madeline and I's fault who are school prefs?
Okay, so you're gonna surrender to your coaches,
No,
but not to black people. You also have the
There's literally
power.
a
You also
relation there.
okay. We'll make arguments as to why you also have the power to change your own
Okay.
prefs.
Cool.
my next question is, you say surrender to blackness. What is blackness?
Well, okay, first of all, it's a structural question. Well, I think this is more implicated within black debate. We're not going to make, well, actually, before that, we're not going to make this kind of Wildersonian creation of blackness. We think that discriminatory practices exist, and we think those can change, but only through the ballot. The second thing is we think it's imbricated within black debate, specifically in the ways in which people are indebted to ideas of anti-blackness within debate, or the debaters who talk about anti-blackness.
My next question, in the start of this 1NC, you said that black literature has nothing to say about the U.S. alliances. Do you stand by that claim?
What? That is not at all.
The topic, the traditional topic, cannot have anything to do with the alliances. What was the beginning of that had to do with the topic itself? I guess that's my clarifying question.
Well, the topic, okay, first of all, the history of the way the topic was produced is Will Baker was like, yo, we should include Africa in the topic.
Okay, well, but the
white
committee, of the topic,
the white
right,
judging committee said,
reject
no, because we don't want K teams to be topical.
Why should you reject an affirmative? Okay.
It's about MPJ, not about the topic.
10 minutes.
We're still prepping, but quick question. What do you all define MPJ as? Just so we're on the same page.
Mutually preferred judging.
Okay, yeah. $5:30. I'm gonna run to the bathroom really quick while Ali sends it out.
It's sent. It's just the case. Is anyone not ready?
I'm not ready. I need a second.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
All right, I'm good to go.
All right, sweet. The United States has constructed the Asia-Pacific to contain the Chinese other, the first island chain nationalized American military control. Two impacts versus military violence, counter operations, sexual base violence on bases, turning islands like Okinawa into test sites for military hardware, and the destruction of the army. And second, relational IR. It is unethical to deny relationality. There is not one paradigm that explains all relationality, because relation is not a binary, but rather a process of becoming resulting from socially negotiated practices. Denying relationality justifies extermination of the other. Containment constructs the other as a danger, justifying American intervention. That Davis and Kowalski proves that the affirmative is a turn to their critique, because it proves that rationality is a socially negotiated practice, which means that the process of engaging over these discussions is important. We have read this affirmative to engage with this literature with you, which obviously proves our argument. To adopt the plan for the justifications presented, a narrative power, lack of policy-making authority, or state agency does not interfere with narrative capacity, because narration constitutes the world in addition to describing. Struggles for our narrative dominance is constitutional layers authorize to produce silence policies. Be relational entanglement. There's no spillover and doesn't leave the room, denies interdependence of all life. The cases that distance their interpretation. Kowalski 20 reference global life reflects relational entanglement with what happens inside outside the state, inside outside of the realm. Outside are codependent, biological interpreting with the democracy. Dark part is a global life and occurs does not exist. Merely in isolation, within this relationality makes powerful. The case for international integration of social transactions are prolific and against aliens. These things surrender to blackness, that's decentralizing and depoliticizing to a deference the same point into Taylor 16. African Americans suffer the force of trauma, criminal justice, but free security means why caught operational spirits define criminal justice. White people are still higher than incarcerated. Almost every country likes to experience death as greater. Raise 1,000 device people over does not mean experiences are equal. There's a basis for solidarity. Obama is all thanks to 10 millions of individuals by disclosure should have all black workers unite with Obama over racial solidarity, or white Latinos also lost their homes to challenge business interaction. Daily struggles to defend education, fight for healthcare, self-reproductive cultures. These are concrete questions. Every movement of faces being an ally that doesn't capture the degree to which workers actually links. It's not as if what workers can choose not to allies, not to grow their own soldiers. Not just an option. It's crucial to resist degradation of living standards. The key questions whether a Korean political analysis can make sense of the world with changes of a different society and a way to get there. Slavery is a relation in world history, not the relation of the world. There is evidence this places Eurocentric colonialism, which means building new connections in world history rather than absolutizing fancy slavery. She in 15, we should be drawn up an emergence from the problematic we said rather than invent problematic to fit our pre-existing cartographies instead of global synthesis and literary art linked multiple notes. For instance, Chinese could lead in the 19th century while crossing the Pacific Ocean to the America and traversing the SES to help us illuminate suppress knowledge. Emphasis and relation among requires distinct from studies usual focus on one empire, one world, a wide connection does not allow you to histories of copper slavery and colonialism. Separate was the body's relation, even though the certain was increased with the business slavery, such as South Africa, the rising of the history of slavery conquers and closing means socializing the world inside of infinite interaction with relations about the relationship with the other history of slavery conquers is not predetermined from close relation. The future offers the unpredictable world like realization of process that can be a painful rejoice from expressive or creative, but never ending and never generative is the niche of which you Adam such refers to construction is abolishes the variation center and periphery critics work capacity to the ability of the world by setting the Eurocentric and other rigid power grids. There's no split between the university and the real world. Policy discussion, the academy are a crucial form of organization. Strategy, Kelly, 11, Gilmore. Gilmore gets all of us when studies about the real world outside of the academy. The consequences are disparity between the rich and education, infrastructure, privatization, everything foreign military, intervention, revolution, is ability beyond just saying about society, not just working about work, organizing with the just more intellectual, transformative intellectual working collective setting that might advance the global freedom policies, the neither policies, politics, or methods to reach a distributed and living some future. This ability to get more justice insisting everything that it takes a foreign policy sheets and meeting with such constitutions that concrete structural dimensions. It's like not just wishing burn other movements. And we start strategies by institutional include schools. These are also places where people who otherwise might never have the opportunity to make something happen. University should institutionalize and thinkers, liberation movements. As schools and users time to sharpen analysis. Only struggles in scale up research sheets, which is potential intellectual work and activism are polar opposites. You can't have one without the other. MPJ disclosure is even worse. It allows the judges, irrespective of NDT, to know where they are on the pool. It biases decisions and puts debaters in uncomfortable situations. When a judge they didn't prep high judges them. Also, it's organization to set their harsh number boundary necessitates strict identity over substance or experience. If Kamala Harris decides to judge, do we prep her over Sean or Shree? No offense on the topic being anti-black means you should prefer people prep based on argumentative preference. It means people who want to read policy arguments can't necessarily prep the judges that give them the best feedback. Black women are good judges, but their skin color is not what determines that. Uncomfortability proves relationality. It means there's no structure that creates a grammar of power that is unmoving, but also means absolute deference doesn't work. That more than one black debater in the round prefer argumentative preference. This proves all their arguments about code switching being necessary, because code switching is not mutually exclusive with the model of debate that we are forwarding. We are not traditional debate. This affirmative is not traditional. What any of these cards are talking about. This talks, for example, I'll go through each one of them. The first piece of evidence they read is talking. The first piece of evidence they read is about the black women's
the experience of Black women faculty and the systemic issues they face. Those are things that the ballot can resolve, which means that all their pressure on offense makes no sense, especially when they have this huge rant at the top about how it is the last 10 years of discussions have not done anything, but also they're arguing about refusal being Black phobia. One is indicted by all of our arguments about relationality, because Black phobia relies on a static identity of Blackness that we reject, but also it's not a referendum on the intellectual capability of people to judge their round, but rather who we have experience with, who we think we are going to win. And the competitive incentive shapes that ballot, and it also shapes their incentives too. The argument about white echo chamber is also not true. This is not what white people want to hear about. When we read this against, for example, Aiden Barrett at Harvard, or when we read this against policy teams, it's obviously not an echo chamber, because they go for things like the assurance dissent, and then we went on a critique of the show of proliferation. The argument about ballot key to pressure also is not true. It doesn't cause social pressure. It doesn't take away power from white judges. It doesn't fix anything that's wrong in the support and debate. It is obviously proves that it is mutually exclusive with all the stuff they said at the top of the critique. Also, there's no critique of Dartmouth in the 1AC. This is important because it indicates the critique can't be read over and over. If anything, the university makes both activism and academia or worse. Activism without theories about as a theory for theory state conduit. 13, random the new detailizing setting a goal of moving into a place in time that is unfamiliar and unforeseeable. We should especially be a community that incorporates applied activism strands and rigorous theory that is put towards us in the world that tends towards reversion. As also in the world that are performing that theoretical reflections are really sufficient. The theory and method of developing for a bunch of centuries with limited imaginations, we are better able to together that each of us can help to be individually global. We properly benefit the existence of economic the economies that is configured to offer such a possibility of function of global use. Who would be together, sort, remake and facilitate dissemination statements, rich enough to inform that is ties together multiple ties, places, and people in the practice, the scope of questions that humans can answer and grasp beyond the can, functional these working groups that humans have developed and making economic consensus. This means retaining communicating the competence of a broad consensus and conversations they are rolling up in the proper rules of their actions and operating springs up from the human heart. That can be proves one research from broadening one's passion across time and space. Person to have the luxury academic training should constitute something other than their personal passion to world changing does not want to morally in Europe that radically limited ensuring opportunities to misdirection of actions that even something producing foreseeable harms. Legal archive is a key site for political struggle. Contesting legal interpretation undermines the claims of absolute authority. Mwani and so opening towards law archives giving links to debates colonialism and indigeneity laws as archives that dynamic formation and which the distinction between a lot of history remove more from mutated and bleed into one another without a review of the clauses and conceptualizing laws. Archive of relation that does not reduce all to history and that expands the interesting of law beyond its formality, meaning that the full reflection of the ongoing struggle through which a law constitutes and expands its reach as an illegitimate force. Law produces documents to court records that regard its authority. Law archive origins of a constituting common and recommend never static with certainty of validity and the determinacy of the archive is attributed to its lack of closed documents. Also, it can undermine the state's judicial power and expose judicial sediments of legal force. A voucher repression is just possessing one reason historians and conceptualize the archive as a politically charged site of contestation. The a lot of archival may be forced to repress indigeneity, but their power can also be determined by what they say to repress. The archive is not a compilation of facts, but also a locus of interpretation. Coaches determine prefs, not debaters, should be reconciled with via the ballot. Judges only have power to reckon and see what happened in this round, not the ways that the teams are structured. Also, the affirmative we have read disproves their argument because they're all about not engaging them. We have obviously proved that we do want to engage them. We've taken classes on these topics. I've talked to Devon for like a million years about all of this. We've engaged with our coaching staff about all these arguments. Proves that it's clearly not true. The argument about the last card I'll read. The next choose colonization of blackness as in but not of the world order. The opposite structural conflict between ordering sovereignty and international alliance versus disordering possession on originality. It's here denies the world-making capacity of decolonization, the principle of self-determination. Get issue 19. Africa Black and the U.S. capacity 14. Reform a violation of human rights, the nation, media, and of all colonial and realized systems to direct kind of decolonization or transition from empire to a nation is inevitable. A republic can colonial national appropriated self-determination from the liberal international tradition. We guessing intercolonial nationals and working against sexual deception. Nationals in Africa and carrying self-determination requires nation building world-making national intervention requires such international institutions of legitimation of alien who is a product of gradual westernization. Tradition shapes our understanding of the collapse of territorial empire, colonization, of gradual westernization from article challenges to European imperial colonization was not experienced as a exclusion from as unequal integration into international society. They don't know our prefs. Also, you can't vote on something you can't know.
Okay, are you good?
Yeah.
All right, you have said that experiences are what drives prefs, right? And shapes choices?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's plenty of Black women in the debate community who have the experience. Toya was the first Black woman to receive a first round. Hugh is an NDT champion. Shannara's been coaching for 20 years. Jaleesa is a CETA finalist. Why does that not prove qualification?
We're using the word experience wrong. I said I don't like prefs are based on who you have experience with. So like I don't.
So
So just in terms of that argument, just clarifying.
So wait. If they're based on experiences, why don't you just? So you're just going to pref the people who have experience, which
no.
So your
we
argument
have
is that
competitive
we should
incentives to
exclude
win the
black
debate that is
women
not
because we haven't
anti-black.
had experience with them. Like
No,
we
have
haven't.
not
They haven't
said
been
we should.
judged.
No, we have not. You have made an argument that says that the intent behind our prefs is anti-black. This argument disproves that because it's driven by other motives, by personal experience.
So
by
you're
my
okay.
own
So you're
relationships.
saying
also
that
agreed
we
black
should
women
be.
can be experienced. That's
So
that's
you're
not
saying
exclusive.
you're saying that we should be anti-black and just care about the competitive aspect of debate.
No, I've never said that. I don't think I said that once, and I think all of
Then
you
what
did
is the
realize that.
argument? You're like we should not pref.
The
You're like
argument is it is not anti-black to not disclose your prefs because those are.
we're not
results of
asking you to
multiple
disclose your
factors.
prefs. We looked at who you've been judged by.
What does that have to? Sure, okay. What does that?
But
that
that's not
doesn't
a
mean that is anti-black. That it the who judges
If you don't
us
have
is not
black
an-
judges judging you, that proves anti-blackness. But okay.
What do you mean? There are literally like 3 black judges in this debate. Okay.
Yes,
I don't understand what this argument is about.
we'll make a link arguments into and see. But okay.
Okay, sure.
I want to talk about the plan focus stuff. I guess why should we focus on the plan when we've made a meta level question about the game before?
Well, I didn't say plan focus. I said plan is co-constitutive with our justifications. This is a critique of the idea that the things that we have said do not engage with your literature or with whatever you want to talk about in terms of like all of the cards that you've isolated are about ignoring black women, not engaging with black women, not engaging in areas that
okay.
affect them. All of
The
that
ballot
disproves that.
the ballot argument. If we win on a 5-0, are you going to change your prefs?
If we win, I mean, it depends on what the judges tell me. I need
If they
more.
all say Darvin
if we lose- if we lose on a 5
GS should change your prefs, will you change your prefs?
If the judges like tell me, yeah, you should change your prefs, I will.
Then why
sure.
not just so if we win
Because we will win an argument that is
so if we
one
win a link
bad-
argument, does that mean we win? Like
No, because
why?
We
Because if we win, that your preferences are anti-black.
No, you don't, because we've said that they do not. I mean, like we're having the same conversation again. One, we will disprove that they are anti-black, but second, we've said
You haven't made an argument, and you don't have another speech until the 1 AR, and that would be new. Okay, whatever. Prep.
I did say that, but okay.
10 minutes starting now. 532. I'll put that in the chat. Okay, stepping over. 532. And I'll send out the cards. All right, should be sent. Carlos, Corey, are you here?
Yep.
All right, it's just gonna be top down from the 2AC. Is everyone good? All right. Traditional debate names the sovereign form of debate that wages counterinsurgency in order to secure the sovereign defense pact of traditional debate. Counterinsurgency does not mean open white rebellion, but instead represents the call to law and order, the ritual of civility and respectability, the cries for cross-racial dialogue in white terms that follow all forms of open white rebellion, racist MPJ practices, an act of protracted struggle against the revolutionary potential of black educators, striking the majority of black judges, and attempt to force black people to get over their demands to structurally adjust to the counterinsurgent form of debate. The imposed unsovereignty of black debate is imbricated with the race war of global black dispossession. The counter your practice of traditional debate train non-black folks in facilitating race war because their presumption in all areas of their lives is that they do not have to put anything on the line. The race war is a protracted war of white aggression that's accelerating in our current historical moment. We have to project white echo chambers where white people only speak to each other. White folks who do not consider themselves white supremacists have ignored the threat of white supremacy, but black people have been saying that the danger is increasing and the threat is terrifying. That's Morrison 2.5. That many white Americans and elected leaders have felt the knowledge that this war of white aggression was real, leave as bodies, innocent people piled up. The critical mass of white people fears the multi-culturalism, progressive politics, political distribution of power, fear often exploited by those in power, have proven again and again to be among the most legal threats to non-white Americans. So how does the nation be addressing the war of white aggression, white supremacy is ultimately against democracy, self-violent, political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism, that we must confront white supremacy's advance and lock with fears of black legal power after the Civil War, the white response to Jim Crow, segregation, voter suppression, illustration to law enforcement, and mostly white, non-white Americans have million amount of political principles in last election, threatening the power of white women, white supremacy, it's challenged, it's still now so vision, stories of the old order, the become easy to ignore. White people become the sort of far-right movements. Joe Hager's but for too long he has said that been a right of collective dialogue. White people that real world violence threat exists, framework, narrative power, because it means they don't get this right, because it means black debaters can't talk about black debate, and that's bad. You can't get to narrate the situation. This is a meta question that comes before the debate, so you should treat this as a procedural argument. This means that the justifications or the plan do not matter in this instance, and you can't weigh the plan when we're talking about your prefs, i.e. it's about how the people who are judging this debate come into the round in the first place before we can evaluate the content. The relational argument is an offense, entering the evidence. They do not pref, but they do not get majority black judges and many black female any black female judges, so they have not, because they don't have a relation to them. Cross-excellencies prefs are based on experiences with other people, which means they should create experiences with black women in debate, which means that you don't actually create forms of relationality. They haven't articulated how the AF creates forms of relationality with black women in debate, which is what our argument is about. Only a surrender to blackness that starts here in this space, the space where non-blacks are trained in counterinsurgent tactics, can begin to unthink and undo the sovereign form of dispossession. Submitting your arguments to evaluation by black educators, engaging black argument on black terms can refuse the sovereign imposition of race war. They conceded, they said in cross prospects. If you all vote for Fullerton on a 5-0 and told them to change their prefs, they will change their prefs. Yes, the argument has the potential to solve, because that is our impact. Through all the black judges on the panel, your role is to hold the AF accountable for having a black femphobia that denies black women any piece of authority. Black judges need their white colleagues to toe the line. To the non-black people on the panel, if you believe that black colleagues are valuable members of the community, if they're intelligent and excellent debate thinkers, and it is your moment to stand up and say no longer we allow our colleagues to be discriminated against in this manner. Now's the time for racial reckoning and healing. The systemic change is only possible when white people can agree that change must happen. We cannot do this alone. We don't have the power, but you do. In the debate context on the issue of MPJ, you must surrender to blackness. Maintaining the status quo can only result in institutionalizing racism. Debate that's Stanley, Mobley 20. The time for racial reckoning is healing, and now the death of the black woman demanding Cleveland, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the risks of racism, higher education is his own form of pandemic. So came to encouragement with white people knowledge that need for change to racism is normalized when the status quo is unchallenged. Justice, by racial justice, complacency, silence can be violence, complicity, consensus, and betrayal. Injuries where micro and microaggressions also live. Last year, witness the silence is unremarkably profound. Why are white colleagues silent? Black colleagues of colonial expend labor using their voice while those looking in silence. Black colleagues needs white colleagues who reflect on their silence, speak the truth about racism. Substantial change begins with white faculty and administrators with access to empowerment benefits, really to the proper custody to guard and protect others from entering. They say there's no critique of Dartmouth in the 1NC. This is wrong. The entire 1NC was a critique of Dartmouth. You don't pref black judges often, and you especially do not pref black female judges. 2AC doesn't refute our claims because they are true. Concession of the interpretation means we come first. I'll do more of that work here. You cherry pick black judges by your refusal to pref the vast majority of black judges. Ask yourself, why are all the black judges on this on this panel male passing, but those who engage in black debate have no choice but to be judged by debates who lean toward traditional debate? Adapt to those judges while maintaining our commitment to black argumentation, which will allows black debate to continue innovating, while traditional debaters' arguments against those teams have stagnated to framework and encapsulate. A diversity of judges is critical to the evolution of debate arguments, and your refusal to pref the vast majority of black judges demonstrate that you are committed to privileging white judges and non-white allies in traditional debate. The argument that you talk a lot to Devon proves our argument that you cherry pick different forms of black people that you are comfortable with, which means that you don't get experiences from black females that are critical for education. They say that we tokenize, they say tokenization that we tokenize certain black judges. No, this is a nigga liquidation, just that they tokenize other traditional debaters. Every time they say, what about enter other person or any other black person, it proves how nigga liquidation makes so that black people are willing to weaponize the difference in how black people may think about debate. It's an example of the rhetoric of tokenization. Black people don't all think alike. They don't always agree on the path to social justice, which is why black debate is vibrant with a diversity of communities and methodologies. This is the liquidation that sustains fractures in black communities as a counterinsurgent attack that aims to disrupt the chaotic potential of black insurgency. We'll make the argument that there are black female judges that are good for them. They haven't had any of them. The arguments about talking to Devon and taking classes are not falsifiable. It only proves that you'd rather talk to black men or really any other person that's not a black woman. We don't need to know your exact pref. See that on tab room that you have only been judged by a few black judges, primarily against K teams, like in this instance, and only one black female judge, Lisa Hampton, the entire year, which proves our argument that you have a clear fear of black phobia, a fear of black women, which also proves that you only get these black judges in rounds where mostly you're hitting K teams like James Madison or like Fullerton. Their refusal to prep black women above the 55% line as the floor, but preferably at the 25% line, is an act of black femphobia. This is our interpretation that they conceded and don't have a counter interpretation. It assumes that black women do not have the intellectual capability to judge rounds where they are debating. It's emblematic of the fear of the angry black woman, which is why they are so uncomfortable with having a black femme judge in the back. Dartmouth has had one black woman judge the entire year. This is not an isolated event, but a rejection, a blood targeted rejection of black women. And this is basically this is why Emory GK, Michigan AM, Michigan PS, Berkeley WW, NDT, Harvard AB, and others have refused to willingly have a black woman judge in the back. They justify the top programs in the nation holistically avoiding black women judges as part of their defense pack agreement. Black women get the worst end of this because of racialized gender dysphoria, where black women are stripped of epistemic authority to judge rounds, many of them having a policy background and numerous degrees that certify their knowledge. It causes psychological trauma and battle fatigue. That's the Davis and Brown for 1NC, because black women labor to get in the position to be able to judge rounds and then get rejected because of race and gender. They say, well, we're not a traditional team. If that is true, then you should definitely pref more black women higher, because there are many black women who would vibe with arguments that are not traditional, like your affirmative, but you don't, which proves our argument. The terminal impact is it produces a plantation economy. Black women judges or get pushed into JV/novice, which is a labor that is racialized and feminized. They become the mammy figure of debate. There are only 4 black men judging right now in all panels, where there are 5 judges, which is very telling when 3 of them are on the same panel, which destroys self-worth and creates a professional conflict within black women's psyche, because teams leave novice and JV after depending upon black women's labor, and then they choose not to pref black women when they're in open. This rejection of black women has a real material impact on their livelihood, denying them access to economic gains like the job mobility and access to direct level position, which means their prefs are a direct way to sustain racial capitalism in debate. Our argument is not the call for the end of all MPJ. That would not benefit black debate, because too much of traditional pool rejects our forms of debate argument, but we could easily resolve the judiciary program if all teams reach a pref black judges above the 55% line, putting them in gettable range. Gary Larson has lamented that all the attempts to develop an algorithm to ensure race judging have failed. He says there is no algorithm to solve racism. The only solution to the problem requires that majority white teams move those black judges up on their prefs. No solution is no longer acceptable response. Confrontation is necessary. Caring is not enough, because while you're caring about what is happening to black people in debate and talking about your relationality, but doing nothing in the real world, black folks are walking around with the trauma. Your refusal causes there is no racism without racists. Those whose complicity sustains the smooth functioning of institutional racism. You're not canceling you. We are reaching out across our differences with care and logic. Extend the Reed Brinkley 12 evidence here. MPJ prevents black people and non-black people from leaving, learning, and practicing the kind of code switching down well out in the speak to black communities and political concerns. White folks make up 60% of the nation. White folks who cannot speak to diverse audiences like black people will find they have limited training, the kind of civic education necessary to sustain American democracy. And there's a Stacey Abrams just said here, the current state of the Democratic Party proves the Democrats cannot win future elections without the black vote. If debate is to continue to be an educational space that trains future leaders, we cannot continue to train students to ignore the concerns and opinions of black people. Destroys all the traditional debate good for education claim. Black women will not remain blindly loyal to any political party. The last 6 years have demonstrated that will significant political power. Future candidates will have a hard time persuading the audience if they do not know how to talk about black women, not the political. That's Compton 20. Black women were essential from the 2016 presidential election, Senate presidential election, and all the way on 2016 and 2018 midterm elections. More than 90% of black women voted for the Democratic candidate. That doesn't even mention all the work they did for voter registration. Turn out black women are the country's most powerful political force. We're while white women are granted for their infidelity and wooed over against the election. While black women are expected to maintain loyal faith, we're not your political moves. But Democrats have forfeit listen to black women, even other members. We're not to say what we're just here to protect ourselves. Active archive members prove documentation. Tribe members is the only way to track your prefs. If you refuse transparency, the floor is 55% line to be getting all black judges and 20% line to ensure black women and in it debates, which they clearly don't do because they've only been judged by Jaleesa Hampton. Open for cross-sections.
Okay, so you read this card that's about how the status quo results in institutional racism. The threat is increasing now. You frame all of these arguments in terms of like black women debaters, black women judges. But your evidence is talking about like faculty of color. Which one is it? Is there a distinction between like black women and the way that people of color experience these microaggressions within academic spaces, or no?
Our argument is that black women judges are faculty and educations of color in the debate space, and that they should be engaging with people,
right?
And that you reject their engagement by not.
But you have said surrender to blackness, not surrender to faculty of color. So does that distinction matter? Do you think this doesn't matter?
Well, we've defined surrender to blackness as prefing all black judges of 55% and prefing black women.
Okay, let's talk about that next. You said there are 5 judges right now that are in the doubles. How is that how can you then ensure that solely through prefs that there is a black woman in every elim, or there is a black woman in every back of the room? How is that like?
Because there's plenty of K judges like us who pref like all black women in the top 10%, and then the policy teams pref all black women below 50, which is why we don't get black women in the back when all of our top 10 are literally black women. Like, we want black women in the back, but we never get them because you all deny that opportunity.
I get that. Let's say you want them, you get them, right? Let's say all of the 5 black women that are in the pool right now judge our round. That means they're not judging any of the other rounds. How has pref solved this problem?
Well, that wouldn't happen if all the teams pref the black women. Then there would be different black women. Plus, our argument isn't that there are only 5 black women in the pool. There's way more than 5 black women in the pool. Our argument is that there are only 4 black women judging debates right now because no policy teams are prefing them.
May I ask how many black women judges are in the pool? Do you know?
14.
There are 14.
14. Okay. That makes sense. So you think that, let's say this was like round 1 of the NDT, 14 judges, that's something that prefs can resolve?
Yes. Like, you should pref black women. Like, doesn't matter how many there are. You can't say there are only 14, so we shouldn't pref them. Like, your argument is unethical no matter how you go about it. You're not making like.
Well, no, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not gonna go for like not preffing black women is good. That's not the argument I'm trying to set up.
Why don't you pref them?
I understand. The argument about demands and endorsing black demands, what are black demands?
Black demands on the state, that's sort of like the Stacey Abrams said, where like we need to have moves that go against the incoming race war. White supremacists are mounting now, and it's important that white educators, or not white educators, but white people and non-black people get educated by black people, particularly black women, because they have the
should I get educated by Kamala Harris?
I'm not saying that like Kamala Harris isn't judging, but like you should get educated by like Shania Reed Brinkley, Amber Kelsey, Peter Cherry,
why
Gabby
her and
Knight,
not Kamala? Why them and not?
Because she's not in the judging pool. This is about debate. She's not.
I understand she's not in the judging. Okay, that makes sense.
Like,
cool.
come on. Like, come on.
Yeah, you got me.
Yeah. You could just flow where Vaughn left off. And there is a 1 card. It should have been sent.
Sorry, did you say there was a document or there wasn't?
Yeah, there was. It's just
Oh.
1 card.
Yeah, just making sure. Cool, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Is everyone good? All right. Cool. It is clear for traditional teams, the only way to change is to debate is on the line. If they think that judges that they are most likely to see in late rounds are willing to vote for them based on their refusal to prep like judges, then they will have to change their preps if they want to win tournaments. The loss is critical because it puts other teams like them that refuse black judges on notice, and this is no longer acceptable practice and will lose the power of the ballot to ensure your colleagues are not discriminated against. Black judges have been discriminated for calling for the redress for years. When is it going to happen? 1520. Their argument is just a call for politeness in the face of discrimination. The lack of diversity in the judging pool in elim debates and policy on policy debate is sustained by the practice that that they endorse, which makes them complicit in calcifying discriminatory practices against MPJ, which results in an unending struggle where black judges and debaters continue to plead for recognition and redress, where that results in battle fatigue and drives out debaters and black coaches, which prevents more development of black-headed debate teams, which are critical for the health and mentoring of black debaters. The negative is a conscientious objection to the seating of judges. It is a question of the jurisdiction to evaluate debate whether or not the preferences of the judges were based on race or racial discrimination or gender discrimination. Their argument is not a call for the end of MPJ, but rather the benefit of black debate, because there is too much of a nutritional pool where our forms of debate engagement. But we could easily resolve this by judge diversity if all teams were black judges and black women judges above the 55% line. Caring is not enough, because while you are caring of what is happening to black people in debate but not doing anything about it, black folks walking around with trauma for your refusal that causes violence. There is no racism without racism, and completely seeing the smooth functioning of institutional racism. We're not canceling you. We're reaching out as across our differences with Karen Logic Snyder and 12. The MPJ that I propose of black is argue for the implementation at the seated nationals as the president has gone very wrong. It has been used to exclude marginalized those in diverse element that exists in policy debate. It has been insulated debaters that from the heavily inducted policy crowd. While we may not agree on everything, we can agree on this marginalization and exclusion must be dealt with. We agree, but there is no solution. Excuse must be dismissed. We need to confront each other and seek a solution. The surrender to blackness argument, the Taylor evidence, interest convergence solves all of your offense. The January 6th assault on the Capitol made half of white America realize they are targeted by white extremists, as well as the coming race where need for cultural competence. So we must build the kind of contact relationship necessary to respond to the current moment of interest, which is interest conversion. Debate trains leaders in the future. They must have the cultural competency to praise diverse audiences. The Taylor evidence just says that solidarity is good. We think that's a bad model for how non-black and white people should engage. Rather, we think that the only ethical relationship that non-black and white people have is to act as an accomplishment toward black people, i.e. actively challenging anti-blackness, actively fighting moves in order to challenge the anti-blackness within the debate. The disclosure of your preps is a violent argument. The 1 and 2 was not asking you to disclose. It's rather asking you to prep more black women judges. The conduit evidence. This is pretty bad piece of evidence. The entirety of our strategy is a call to question your preps, which is a form of resistance and activism within the debate space. Obviously, it's in academic space because it refuses your call for anti-black debate practices. The Mwani evidence. This evidence is non-falsifiable because it hasn't been tested in front of black women judges, which means that they don't know if this is true. But even if the question is before the plan, the legal challenges would happen. Legal challenges would happen if black judges and coaches were to try and proceed at the NDT or the 88 in order to change judging practices, which is why Devin in 2012 threatened Jake Thompson with legal challenges, but Jake Thompson then allowed Devin to judge at UNLV because Thompson did want to face legal challenges. Otherwise, because it would ultimately collapse the debate, even even if black people do not want to create legal challenges, because that only collapses the debate. Only the loss can resolve it. The coaches do press argument, so you are willing to surrender to your coaches, but refuse to surrender to blackness. If you demand that your press reflect the diversity of our community, then your coaches have no choice but to concede to your demand. You have the agency to produce change. If your coaches refuse your demand, then report them to the supervisors, because I bet you, if you tell them that you are forcing to discriminate against black judges, they would face significant pushback from the college administration. Even threatening to tattle is enough to call your coaches. Don't pretend that you have no power in this instance, the power to end this type of discrimination. Now, the Shushu and the she and Get You evidence are both critiques of Afro-pessimism, and the refusal of rationality with black women judges that proves that the AFS method is black femophobic. That's the 2NC link debate. Their refusal to engage in socially negotiated practice with black women. They refuse to employ black women as opportunity to relate to the affirmative. It also answers the Kelly evidence, because even if they connected the plan to it cannot create relationality, especially when they don't prep black women judges who can actively acknowledge that the app would create some sort of rationality, especially when the top of the 2AZ overview is just about how the way relational IR works. But even if anti-black, we're not making an ontological claim. Anti-blackness at the level of ontology is not our argument, but what is the debate really are? We don't need to win ontology. Our argument is that the violence is contingent. That only supercharges our argument. Judge discrimination is a contingent form of violence that is resolvable by prepping judges above the 55% line. We don't think black flesh magnetizes bullets, but this is we don't think black flesh magnetizes. We do think that black flesh magnetizes bullet, but this is not Afro-pessimism. Vaughn, is there something you need me to read? Vaughn? Okay.
I'm looking.
I'm gonna read the cherry picking stuff. Yeah. They cherry pick black judges. If there are 25 black judges at a tournament and you only prep 3 above the 55% line, that's a protected class and targeted black judges for strike. Most black debaters who engage in black debate practice are ranked at almost every judge above the 55% line. Judges that we rank below put their paradigm and are willing to judge planless absent and reverse cannot be said for black judges that coach and judge mostly key performance teams. Their paradigms still say refuse to vote for plan-based debates. Many black judges have voted for the cap against black and performance teams. Those teams and judges are willing to talk to traditional teams that refine arguments.
I'm gonna run to the bathroom before I start. Okay, we have 5:30 starting now. 3 minutes. It'll be the case, straight down. Wait for Barlow, just to make sure. Oh, awesome. Cool. Anyone not good?
Give me a second.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're good.
I'm good.
Cool. Not enough time on framework in the block means that the ballot is not able to reconcile, nor should it reconcile the harms in this round. It can extend our interpretation that you should vote for the plan for the justifications of the 1AC. The only ballot can reconcile as a judge whether or not the 1AC is a good idea. Questioning, there'll be a lot of defense in the rest of the 1AR about ways that they cannot solve or that their method is not good. But at a top line level, you should prefer the type of research and argumentation that is premised on giving research practices that either affirm a resolution or have a question about the way that we interact with people outside of the debate round. They've conceded all of our offense, and it's not just limited to debate, but the way that we can have revolutionary potential to tame structures outside of just the debate community, that we can spill up and change things like the alliance structures and the way that U.S. militarism reverberates around the globe. They have conceded all of this. Their only answer was about narration, which they have conceded that our framework allows, because we're understanding the way their research practices relate to things like U.S. militarism, can have discussions of anti-blackness in the debate in the ways that that structure is just like the 1AC has done, but that should not bracket the only question of what the ballot can solve. Rather, it should be a question about what type of narrative epistemologies and research practices should we have in the round. That means that only we are able to solve for our impact, militarism and militarism and Chinese containment rhetoric, all of which are offense on voting negative only for changing the questions of press, and indicate that the permutation of still discussing these type of questions but not voting negative means that we can still resolve all of their offense but still understand that we should have questions of debate that are not outside of this question. On the framework debate itself, we can say that we will pref Black women before the round ends. All that means is that the ballot cannot reconcile this difference if they are right. The ballot question is not intrinsically a question of whether or not we will pref them. One, we can say they will if you believe that might be disingenuous. All that indicates is that the ballot itself is not a rectification for the harm. The ballot does not solve who we pref next round or next tournament, because you, all 5 judges, have no more authority over what Turner decides to do after this round. That also after this round, they say we can change our press. First is that if we win, then we can't just change our preps. I'll extend that offense here first. We don't know our preps. There's a reason why we didn't stand up and give you who are in our top 20s, because we do not have access to that question. The question of who we have judged is also not a 100% reality, because it depends on what the other team judges and how those rounds get out. That's a reason why also we don't link to their tokenization. Just because we're indicating that we're trying to engage in the research practices does not mean that there's also a double bind there, which indicates that either we pref all Black judges or we pref some and that seem as tokenization. That's why you should default to our interpretation of preferences, which is based off of experience and capability that you've had with other judges in the round. This is also offense that was conceded about. If you have a bad relationship with a judge that wants to pref you shouldn't just pref them because they're Black. It's the same argument as saying you should just pref Kamala Harris if she were to judge. That's not saying that she is in the judging pool now, but it indicates that just defaulting pertain to identity rather than a range of factors such as argument, familiarity, and experience having judging, and see if they view the world in the same way you do is not offense for them, but indicates that that is the way that debate should be structured, because this is an educational activity. The people come because they enjoy. They say we don't press black judges first, is that all people on this panel have seen us before. It indicates that that's not just the same context that we only have black judges when we debate black teams. That's not the way that it indicates, and because that's why you can't just have a totalizing critique of traditional teams without knowing the intricacies of their preps, which no one can do, and they should not be explained. That was their own argument. They say that it's also not cherry picking or working with Devon because he didn't work with Rutgers. Just indicates that we want to have that type of educational practices, but the judging itself isn't able to solve that. I'll do that offense here that the ballot is not able to solve. First is that there's a disconnect. Just because you judge does not mean that you have to engage with that literature. That's an important solvency deficit that was conceded. Having Jalissa judge an Emory versus Kansas debate doesn't mean that they're both going to read anti-blackness arguments. It just means that there's a higher likelihood that she might be post-rounded, which is also offense on the tokenization that just putting black judges in room is not nearly enough to remedy all the structural problems that they read pieces of evidence about or discussed in the debate community. That's why one, the ballot's not able to solve, nor is there research practice about only preferring black judges. You should ask the question of why they gave those thresholds in the first place and how those thresholds should be malleable. All of those are reasons why there's not offense for them having specifically 20%, or all reasons why it's just an arbitrary line that just causes tokenization. The second offense for why solvency is bad is because they've conceded competitive incentives that are not just impacts of prep, but the way that we engage and the way the 1AC is done. That's why teams like in this debate, for example, could just say we will prep black judges because we want to win the round, or if you all vote negative, then we won't still prep black judges in the next round. All of that are indicating that the ballot is not an intrinsic argument, nor an intrinsic argument for how preferences change, but it is also a way the competitive incentives structure every single argument in the debate, which is the reason why they can't. All of these structures are reasons why you should remedy these type of questions without the competitive incentives of the ballot. These type of discussions are then net offense for us because we can still have and talk about these discussions, but they shouldn't be tied to the ballot. That's the reason why you can vote on the permutation or vote affirmative, because of the relationality arguments, all of which were conceded, indicates that the 1AC research practices is not mutually exclusive with the discussions that are having, just that the ballot is not good. I'll also extend MPJ bad. They have conceded that there's the tokenization that I did already extend, but it also indicates that it's not a remedy for solving the boxes. They say debate train solidarity. That's not solved by judges. They also say all the black power arguments, the liberal there's also surrender to black. This just causes liberal altruism, which certainly means that you should not do with Myerson. In 18, liberal racism and altruism, why people send us so unjust kind of why people are able to first are willfully out of the question spend right words with all sides that ask for only true racism first of all, rather than system power also why people have obligation to cut to back change the black communities, but can't change the black communities. They say preferring black judges, again, no algorithm is able to solve. That's their own argument, indicates that their threshold is not good enough.
5:32 starting now. All right, that's time. Is everyone here? Corey, are you here?
I'm good to go.
Is Corey here? Corey, are you here?
I'm gonna grab some water. Be really quick.
All right. The order is just the case, the MPJ stuff. Everyone good now? All right. Concession of the race war uniqueness that proves our argument. It means we need more black female educators in debates. The race war is growing as white supremacists realize the strength of the non-white vote and the risk that white supremacy will fail, and they're willing to use guerrilla warfare style violence to ensure that they see as white survival. And not only black people and other people of color risk the kidnapping plot against Gresham Whitmer and the violent attacks on white Capitol officers, police officers during January 6 riots demonstrate the white people who are not pro-white supremacy are the enemy of the race is all white. That's the guerrilla evidence we read coming out of the 2NC. These groups like the Brown Church for Trump, the Proud Boys, and the Earth Keepers are trading in urban and guerrilla warfare like tactics targeting black power, targeting power grids, and planning mass casualty events. Progress toward racial equity is not permanent, nor is it guaranteed and proven by the draconian rollback and voting rights to disenfranchise the black vote. The future is not given to us. We will have to fight for it. The lines have been drawn by white supremacists, not by black people. The question remains, whose side are you on? The 1 AR's push on framework is not enough for an half ballot. They can see it that this is a procedural, but if you find it hard to see that way, you can think of their argument as a permutation that they didn't make in the 2AC, so you shouldn't grant them it. Also, it doesn't flow through because they can see at the functional link level of the examples of how you do not pref black judges, which means that the permutation doesn't flow through because you performatively are attributing to the anti-blackness. They've also conceded that the seating of the judges is a prior question. Before we can evaluate the content of the affirmative forms of relationality, we have to discuss the ways that there are judges in the back, i.e. how are the judges situationally seated before the content for the round. The permutation argument is new, but conceding the link to the 2AC 1AR means you don't get a permutation. Them saying that they don't have the access to the prefs is important. Now it's bigger than just start with GS, but the whole school, which was my argument about how big schools with a legacy of great debate programs are able to have forms of anti-blackness, which means that you should check them and hold them accountable. It makes your ballot even more important and proves our ballot key arguments. There's no double wide here because our argument is that you don't pref any black women, and you conceded that. We take John Turner, but y'all don't take Shannara. Literally proves our argument. Every black judge in this battle must vote negative to hold Dartmouth accountable, and every non-black judge should vote negative if they think black people and black women have viable thoughts that should be heard in the community as a form of non-black people surrendering to blackness. They don't provide a role for you, for you, Kennedy and Street. You should try to get off Dartmouth's pref sheet and move down so that black women could move up. And the other, Michael, Carlos, and Corey, you should hold Dartmouth accountable. They say white altruism. It's a new argument, but I'll answer. You're only anti-ethical relation to surrender to blackness, or else you legitimize explicit anti-blackness to become complicit in the practices that make Dartmouth anti-black. So voting negative, saying that no, your prefs are not okay, and that there probably should be a black woman educating you in debate. They don't have an impact for any of their white altruism. Just what is the impact of white people fighting and putting their lives on the line for black people? There is no alternative for white people besides white altruism, because if they don't fight for black people, then they will just either read white supremacist literature or read some liberal internationalists, which are both meant to reproduce anti-blackness. And Armando, even if Armando kills Hillary, their alternative is worse. They say it's arbitrary. It's not arbitrary line, because above the 55% line is in the gettable range. That's in the 2 and C, 1 and C, and here now in the 2 and R, because Gary uses the algorithm where it's within 25 to 30 percentile of where you have them pref. So if you pref black women in the 20% and we have them in the top 10% and we have black judges at 30 up and you have 55 and up, it puts each black judge in a gettable range for each team, which means that we would get black judges. But the fact that that you don't have them there means that it's not arbitrary, but literally the reason why we can't get a black female judge and proves that who's your black femphobia. There's a gut check. 2AC cross-check says if you all vote negative, they will change their pref. So just vote negative. Don't buy their argument that will pref black women after the round because it's the NDT, but also because there's nothing at stake if they vote app, but everything's at stake if they vote neg, because it means that they'll have to reconsider their pref. So now what if you decide that you don't like the idea of picking a side or surrendering to blackness? That's okay. You can ask yourself who won the debate on the flow. The 1AR is conceding a lot of nuance and offense from the block. If we went on the flow, then you also can vote negative, even if you don't agree with our arguments. You can just vote on who they're debating on the question posed in the debate. Fairness would at least dictate that, but we would think that you should frame your ballot through interest convergence. White supremacists are coming for you too. Your interest in your own survival and maintaining American democracy because with the black people's interests. Even if you don't want to pick a side, white supremacists will choose war for you. The question is, what can you do in the space where you have power to act to build the kind of contract that are leaning towards this strap? You choose to avoid black judges that lean toward decay and performance debate, while you are still willing to take the K judges because there are enough of them that you can't completely avoid it. So you pathologize black K judges and target them for disenfranchisement, but those who engage in black debate or have no choice but to be judged by white judges who lean toward traditional debates. We can't afford to cherry pick. There aren't enough black judges, and there are too many white judges who avoid all those who reject our form of debate. Discrimination in MPJ makes debate structurally unfair. Your rejection of black judges has material consequences that they all conceded. It makes it more difficult for black people to get direct debate jobs. It limits diversification at the coaching and director levels. It produces psychic violence that goes cold conceded. The only offensive argument in this debate and battle fatigue. It's an example of spirit murder as black judges continue to plead for change from this majority white community being dismissed at every turn. The class civilizations places an undue burden on black folks. This particularly true for black women. Extend the black femphobia
just had the goals cold conceded. The top teams, including you, avoid black women judges. The impact is a plantation economy where forcing black women to disproportionately judge a novice in JV, which becomes a feminized and racialized activity, making black women the mammy figure to raise young players who then don't prep them, which they get when they get to open, causes racial gender dysphoria and psychological trauma, reproduces racial capitalism in the debate space. And at the end of Stacey Abrams just had, it goes conceded, white people need to know how to talk to black women. You should be prepping black women above the 20% line. Black women, you should be prepping them at the 20% line. Otherwise, black women become the mammy figure of the debate. Our plantation economy argument, it's all there. If all of their spillover claims are true, then that debate creates relationality. Then you should have black women judges be able to tell you how you can communicate and perform race so that when you lead the debate, you can communicate to diverse audiences. Otherwise, you risk anti-blackness that when you talk to it, start code switching argument, all the arguments about how the app fosters relationality or not offense because you do not prep any black women. They also concede the interpretation that you must prep black women, although the only answer was that it's arbitrary. It's not, because the work I did about how it means that you will put black people in a gettable ways, because that's just the nigga equation. This is also damning because it means that they tokenize forms of black debaters, saying that only a certain type of black person should be in the round, which is inherently problematic. So at the end of the debate, they have conceded functionally all of the link debate, meaning that we have proven that Dartmouth GS has not prepped any single black woman. They only had one black woman in the debate against a K team, which means that they don't prep black women, and they only cherry pick certain black judges, which replicates logic of anti-blackness. They conceded and produced a plantation economy where black women are always producing their labor and not getting anything back for it, which means that you have to vote negative to reject them. And yeah.
3 minutes. All right, the order is case. I'll wait for everyone to be back.
2, 3, 4. I'm just missing one. Okay. Oh, 5. Okay, cool. Is anyone not ready? Okay, cool. Our interpretation is that you should vote for the 1AC based on the justifications presented in the 1AC framing issue. The ballot will never resolve the structural barriers identified. Ask yourself how voting for the other team in one debate will result in MPJ. Nothing about voting negative results. Reasons why debate is unfair to Black women judges and the microaggressions they face, even when they are practiced, proves that the algorithm will fail. It's their argument. Second, localization is bad for work debates proves that we should not localize components of debate that are racist to resolution because they're not localized there. Believing we can resolve structural issues through ballot reproduces fatigue and create a perpetual sense of structural fairness. Answers all of the race war stuff that they did at the top because they did not answer any of the relationality evidence of the 1AC and the 2AC and the 1ER, which impacts turn this. It says that there is no white versus Black, but rather the process of relationality is an ongoing process. It is one that is socially negotiated and one that is not ongoing. There is saying that there is a white versus Black race war proves that there's create the tensions and it locks out the strategy for counter mapping because it makes the project of white supremacy seem ineffable. It makes it seem like it is a story that is just waiting to be unfolded. It means that we cannot provide the counter maps that are necessary to fight against those ideologies. We should let our education solves better because we have conversations about the ways that militarism affect Black women, the way that militarism affect people on a military basis, the way that they affect people who are they get impacted by sexual violence. So all of these are all of this is an impact to their method because even if you agree that MPG is good, that the structural reasons that why debate is bad, you cannot vote for their method because they're independently bad and we will win offense on it. The argument as to why it is violent to violate international capitalism does not make any sense. You cannot make a procedural argument and then say there are structural reasons for why that will fail. Prepping Black judges does not solve the Proud Boys, does not solve the Brad Boys. It does not solve the attacks on reactionary attacks on white capitalism. It does not solve any of the stuff that are causing the race war because there are structural reasons for putting the burden on Nalin and I to prep for the press to solve, but obviously proves it doesn't make sense. There was no permutation in the 2EC. We agree this wasn't a permutation. It was an argument that you can vote affirmative because you think that having the discussion about the 1AC that we introduced is a good idea and agree that we should implement the MPG reform because that was something that was suggested in CETA outside the debate, which proves that it doesn't make sense to hold the debaters responsible over it. Any arguments about achieving equality of outcomes is undesirable because debate is a competitive activity, which they have conceded. Not every team will get judged by a Black woman at the NDT. Debate is not the place to produce end goals via the institution. We should instead preserve the pause because that preserves the direction of the activity and maximize all the benefits to be attained from it, which is proven when they later say that this is all about the flow, this is about fairness, which proves how disingenuous these arguments are in the position that it puts us in. The argument about how we don't have Black judges is also nonsensical. Yes, we do. We've said this from above, but also you can see this is determined from other teams, but also that even if we did prep Black judges, it doesn't solve anything. Look at their evidence. It's talking about the way that Black women face microaggressions in faculty settings when you're in an academic conference and you're in a room with all these white people who think you're crazy, who think that you're angry whenever you talk. That is what makes you feel unsafe. That is not the same thing as saying that reading the 1AC is the same thing that is the status quo and proves that we turn these arguments. The argument about having no access also doesn't make sense because it is not a reason to vote us down. Just because they just vote us down. Arguments about why Turner should just close the third perhaps to us doesn't make sense to hold us accountable. Now the surrounding to Blackness stuff is a huge component of the 1AC, but before I go on to that, you need to understand the ballot doesn't solve any of their arguments. Malin went for the strength to neutralize their impact, which means it wasn't conceded. They just didn't handle the internal link well. One, judging power. You all cannot legislate whether or not Turner press next year because the only power you have is over educating this round and takes out all their offense on external shifts. Second, don't solve this insult the race war offense because they can see it only spill up comes from this social discussion and research practices means that permutation discussion relations inside and outside of round solves. Third, spillover can only educate this round. The ballot does not have the revolutionary potential they think it does. All that shows up is a loss on town room and everyone will just think they will debate better than we will. Can't solve structural harms. They indicate competitive incentives, a model their power of the ballot because it divorces this discussion of the competitive incentives of this debate, which is important because otherwise engagement will always be disingenuous. Things can promise it will change press, and so voting against them isn't necessary. Then not realize these arguments you went around and use a structural model in the debate coming community to adjacent than ELMs. The argument about battle fatigue also doesn't make sense because economic judges all of those are outside the question of MPJ. Conceding post-rounding in the arguments of changing via the Stacey Abrams that is not solved by putting Black judges in the back because it focuses the judges to hear violent research practices, which is their argument. Also because they can't change press for teams who as coaches determine them because their advocacy places the burden on debaters with space scholarships was impacted at above. The argument about trending to Blackness is bad because you can see this results in liberal altruism. This is exactly what they're critiquing, the idea that we should focus on the individual, but in reality these are all structural issues which makes you feel good for voting for them, but at the end of the day it doesn't really do anything, which means that Sean and Tree, your role in this debate isn't to defer to Blackness, it's to defer to what you think will matter the most because like they said, white supremacy affects you too. There is an attack on everyone. If you do not choose the side, white supremacy will choose the sides for for you. So choose the side of the affirmative because it engages in a worthwhile politics. The argument about the alternative being worse doesn't make sense because you don't have a solvency. And all the arguments about the algorithm not solving proves our argument because the argument about having 20%, 80%, whatever, even if a peer is able to solve the do not access that, which answers the black phobia dissent, and the E.C. Graham dissent, which is especially damning given they consider the rationality dissent because it proves that we can also learn through things via our evidence. You're arguing about how I never said we would change our press if you voted neg. I said I will change our press if you all tell me you are racist, you have done bad things. Those are reasons that you should endorse the NPR. That is a decision that would make me take it. I'm going for an impact to the model debate, but also to the procedural, but also reasons for why we don't like this argument. Argument about why white people will choose the survivals again proves that deferral is bad because it means that we defer to think people like Kamala Harris said on questions instead of like Sean Kennedy, for example. I would much rather hear your opinions on this affirmative than what she thinks. The argument about Kamala not being in the pool doesn't matter in this instance because it means that because it proves the thesis of our argument that if you make the argument that we should always refer to black women in any instance, it means that it takes out any nuance and it doesn't lead to the engagement that they're talking about. It leads to indoctrination where we never result in consensus or any development of our ideas, which is all proven by the fact that if we lose the debate, you are not going to tell me, Ali, you're racist. You need to go think about this. You're going to tell me, Ali, this is how you answer this argument.
Great debate, y'all.
Good debate.
Good debate, y'all.
Good debate.
Let me know if anyone wants a card doc.
Are judges okay with me streaming the RFDs?
I don't care. I don't know about the other judges.
I don't care either.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me.
Sorry, I went to the restroom and heard judges talking. You all asking something?
No, they just asked if judges are okay with them streaming the decision.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Cool.
No worries. I believe we're all in.
Before RFD start, I just want to ask again, everyone's okay with the RFDs being streamed, right? I think I got all yes from 4 of you.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah.
Are both teams here? All judges? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, cool. So great debate, y'all. Congratulations for getting to the double octafinals of the national debate tournament. The decision is a 4-1 for the negative from Fullerton.
Hi, Sat. I think in general, there were sort of two arguments that were important for my decision that I just couldn't get over. The first is, does the ballot remedy the disads and uniqueness claims isolated by the neg? This is the roadblock I most struggled with because while the neg is winning like conceded uniqueness arguments that there exists a race war out there, it's kind of unclear why my ballot in the doubles of the NDT stops the Proud Boys, brown shirts for Trump, or even black femphobia in debate that is not solely premised on, outround prefs or the outcome of this debate. Honestly, I'm not really sure ultimately why surrendering to blackness and not voting for Dartmouth GS in the doubles would cause Turner to change the pref sheet or ensures sort of a non-disingenuous commitment to a certain side of the race war. The second thing that sort of need a clarification for me is putting all black judges above the 55% line and all black women judges above the 25% line solve the disads that are isolated in the 2NR? I kind of decided no. Dartmouth makes this argument in the 1AR and 2AR that just having black women seated in debates wouldn't solve phobias or battle fatigue because black women's labor would be responded to with microaggressive post-rounding by white people in the community, et cetera, which would not be remedied through MPJ reform. The AF also has an argument that deciding to pref judges based on the race or how they present their gender is tokenizing, and that relationality shouldn't be so superficial that depends on other factors like opinions about arguments. I think ultimately I'm less of a good critic for a genre negative argument that sort of is focused on some of these pre-round choices that don't really directly contest the 1AC. So I'm not too surprised about sort of the split.
Cool. I can go next. So I thought this was a great debate. I thought it was interesting. There's some questions that I'm left wondering that shaped my decision and how I thought about the round. The first question is whether Fullerton has won a link to the claim that Dartmouth does not pref black women, hence why they don't get them. The second question is if Dartmouth had more black women judging them, what impact/effect would that have? And third, would my ballot have an effect on changing the way that their teams do their prefs? Ultimately, on the first question, I think I end up coming in favor of Fullerton. I believe that Dartmouth didn't really deny that their pref sheet lacks black women in a gettable range as described by the analysis of Gary's algorithm for placing judges within debates. I think this has a significant implication because it kind of corners Dartmouth into winning a defense of excluding black women from their pref sheets, which I think Dartmouth is doing okay work talking about why folks may not want somebody like Kamala Harris judging their debates. The issue I have is that I'm having a difficult time making the direct applicability of that analogy to black women within the NDT judge pool. I think it would be weird to assume that judges currently in the pool are analogous to Kamala Harris's opinions. So this makes me think that the negatives black femphobia argument as well, because then it makes sense that the fear of black women like Kamala Harris then becomes grafted onto black women in the NDT judge pool, which I think would then be impacted out by the 2NR's conversation of plantation politics and relegation of black women within debate to mammy status, although the NDT doesn't really have a JV division, but I think their characterization still holds weight. The second question is on the impact of having more black women judging and the impact that would have. I think Dartmouth tries to go for the argument that if there were more representation, that it doesn't necessarily change structural conditions like animosity within academic spaces or invitation to things like academic conferences. And while I do think that the AF is correct about this issue, the issue within this debate round wouldn't necessarily change those things in an immediate sense. There is still potential to change those things. Fullerton packages this argument to his discussion of Stacey Abrams and portable skills, which I think is a smart internal link to many of the questions about structural issues and real material change, at the very least, functions as embedded clash to the aforementioned claims. I do agree with Fullerton that there are Black women within the debate community that would jive with the arguments that the affirmative advances. But more importantly, I'm left wondering a more fundamental question. How will Dartmouth get access to this claim that their team's MPJs are set by experiential relationships? The issue I have thinking about this under that interpretation is that if you've never been judged by Black women because you have not established those relationships in the status quo, then I think that then you'll just never be judged by Black women, right? And so because there isn't a history of you either like giving these judges a shot and not having it work out, I don't know if you were able to then claim that you don't have these experiential relationships, because I think it's a fundamentally different argument if you were to say that you did have some of these people judge you and then you pedagogically might disagree with them, or you might, not agree with how they make decisions in the past and hence why you don't press them, or even maybe a conversation of what their judging paradigms say, right? But because there isn't, like you say, a conversation of experiential relationships, then I don't know how your interpretation or your model for debate would be one that genuinely wants the inclusion of Black women if the whole point is that you say that you're building relationships, but how do you build relationships with people you never give a chance to build relationships with, which I think is a really fundamental problem with the way that Dartmouth chooses to engage this issue. The last question I have is I spend pondering time on is whether my ballot can have any change on the representation of Black women within debate spaces, and I'm left kind of unsure about this, mostly because of the nature of debate as an activity and a lot of the things that you are saying about how you don't do your own press. However, maybe I misheard or misinterpreted the AF answer to the initial question of whether you would change your press if dropped. Initially, I understood the AF's response as we would change our press if the judges dropped us and told us to change our press. However, by the time the argument gets to the 2AR, it comes across more as we would change our press if the judges dropped us, told us we're racist, and that we would change our press. This is a minor but important distinction, because throughout the debate, I didn't think that Fullerton had to win that you all were personally racist, as opposed to winning that your way of press is built around a systematic exclusion of Black women from these high caliber debates. I think that the affirmative was onto something when pushing on the fact that their evidence is about people of color and in some way not making the same claims that they're making about gendered focus on the exclusive practices with MPJs. I think that as a team that I judged a bunch this season, you all had game going there, but the specificity of Black women in the debate makes it difficult for me to think about these things this way. So ultimately, I think that you're left sort of holding the bag on your initial answer, which is that you will change your press as a result of people telling you that you should change your press, because I think that interpretation kind of changes, or at least your answer to that kind of changes throughout the debate, but I'm holding you to the answer that you initially gave, while also thinking about the fact that Fullerton's argument is that there is nothing else they can do other than to use the ballot to then try to rectify those changes, because the power is ultimately within big programs like Dartmouth or people that are able to make those decisions. And so the only form of recourse that they would have would be something like the ballot within these particular spaces. And so for those reasons, I vote negative.
I can go next if you don't mind. I saw the debate along the line the same as Carlos. I actually started with the description of the status quo that we're in a race war now and it's only going to intensify. I think that Dartmouth kind of, the only pushback here is that, well, the ballot can't change that. I think only Fullerton has given me a way to conceptualize the way the race war is happening, and then some of the tools we can remedy via, the Abrams disad and the way the portable skills can happen via engagements with Black people. I think, again, your argument about relationality, I think that they're winning multiple disads to it via this interest convergence argument, which I just think is really smart in a whole bunch of ways. I look at whether the ballot will resolve it or not. I'm not 100% sure that the ballot will resolve it, but like Carlos said, I said the same thing. And when you immediately answered that question, will you change your press? And the answer was what I assumed to be yes. I thought that was a kind of a tactical error in that sense, because I knew, that if functionally you were spotting them well. That is the action of the ballot, is to tell Dartmouth that, there are some problematic ways in your preferences because you're not getting Black judges, and they've given me kind of like an algorithmic way to kind of resolve that. There's some pushback about why that could be arbitrary, but I just think that they're doing at least a better job of explaining the way that Gary has broken down why 55% is the magic number, and a reason for why, if everybody does that, it's a reason why Black women in particular will show up on panels. And I think that, kind of like Carlos has hinted at, I think the reason why I think your relationality stuff doesn't get to that point is because you're talking about reasons why that can spill up to policies regarding militarism. I don't understand why that spill up is a good thing if it doesn't involve the consent of Black women particularly. Also, I am a little bit bothered throughout the debate about this Kamala Harris example. I think that it's kind of cherry picking or kind of feeding their cherry picking argument and what they're talking about, this plantation economy. And I don't think they ever say this, which I was kind of disappointed in. I don't think you should be able to use Kamala Harris as a bad Black woman, right? I think that Fullerton, y'all should be making better arguments about like why that form of, right, like, yeah, Black people will give you different forms of opinion and different forms of engagement, but it is that diversity in Black thought which informs the way that Blackness is, complex as shit. And I think that like your arguments about why white altruism is always inevitable and we should try to weaponize that as best we could against anti-Blackness, right? It should always be like, how can we respond to anti-Blackness? And there are going to be a multitude of ways to do that. But the way that the more understanding and more engagement we have with diversity of Black thought, that's a good thing. That's your answer to why having judges like Kamala Harris shouldn't be something that we run away from, and an offensive reason for why that type of cherry picking is a bad thing. So that's kind of the way I saw the debate. Also, I guess the last thing I'll say is I did look at, like the impact turn stuff about like why putting Black women in hostile debates will also lead to some type of fatigue. And I think that there's a good argument. I don't necessarily hear a on-point answer from Fullerton. I think I end up resolving that. I just think that you don't give me a way to resolve that necessarily. And I think that their description of status quo just outweigh, or given their description of status quo, their dissets outweigh the risk of Black women being fatigued by getting post-rounded.
I can go unless Sean wants to go first. Doesn't matter. I think those decisions 100% agree with Michael and Carlos. I think I started in two places. The first one is I think I have a problem with this approach from the affirmative, because a lot of your offense that you're forwarding against their arguments like turn big components of the affirmative or disprove sort of the case pushes that you're putting at the top. So you preface each of your speeches with sort of your process of relational narrativization can change all of these different social dynamics and lead to like an inertia in social change. And in regards to the race war, one of the first things that you say at the top of the 2AR is that there is no race war. It's all socially mediated, and that it's not stuck, it's not fixed. And yet a lot of your turns to sort of their arguments are, here are these structural issues that cannot be overcome if we were to just magically put Black women in the back of the room. They would face all these like microaggressions. What do we do about that? The ballot and sort of the process of that engagement, and there's no institutional way to change sort of those structural issues. Even the referencing of like you all not having control of your prefs is indicative of sort of this idea that there's a lack of control or ability for there to be shifts in sort of the relational paradigm. I just found that like really odd and difficult to reconcile the legitimacy of the affirmative. So I think if I take that at face value, I don't think you have an AF at the end, or an AF that solves your impacts or is able to spill over or spill up. I think the second level though is once I look at the details of the debate, I think that I agree that Fullerton is largely controlling sort of both the rhetorical and I guess line by line level of the debate, and that they have forwarded sort of indicts to the very process and the idea of distancing and sort of binaries that the affirmative is sort of operating within. And I think those are characterized by a couple of rhetorical things that happen in the debate that aren't really responded to in an in-depth manner. The first is the push that you all make that sort of you don't have control of your prefs. You're not even aware of those, that that's sort of an institutional question for Dartmouth that you don't have responsibility for. They re-raise and are like, there's a bunch of ways that if you actually cared about sort of this process or this thing, that you could place pressure from an institutional standpoint. I don't have an answer to that. There's an argument that they make, again, about sort of this accessibility question being embedded within sort of an installation of positivity or feeling good, that's or just comfortability, and that's characterized through the idea that your prefs are only mediated by what you know and the experiences that you have had. But to Carlos's point, I think that turns itself when you don't have those experiences, or there's only one experience that you have. And the assumption then becomes that that one experience, i.e. having Jaleesa at the back of the room, inform the potential for there to be any other Black women or, you know, proliferous, different thinking, different approaching Black people to the activity to judge you in specific, or not in specific contexts, but broadly in debate. I think that those are all just like rhetorical issues, but also argument issues that can't just be overcome by the ballot doesn't resolve this, the ballot doesn't resolve that. Because I think that they have set a framework that at the very least says, I need, at least the framing that's given to me and given to Michael and given to Carlos, is that we need to reject sort of these iterations of anti-Blackness and the appeal to sort of neutrality or innocence or just comfortability. And so I think, given I could say more, but just to like put a bow on it or whatever, I think given the top level, I feel like relationality not really like in your ball field anymore, and some of the other just rhetorical shifts that are made throughout the debate, I think that I could comfortably say either I don't vote F because I don't think you I don't think your model of relationality is possible. And I think that they have impact turned that idea of relationality as it's been set up. Or I could say that I vote negative because I think that there is a possibility for the ballot to serve as sort of to remonstrate this issue of anti-Black oversight, and that there's a possibility for that to create some kind of structural change. Or I could say I don't think the ballot does that, but it at the very least challenges the embedded anti-Blackness that you have not provided sort of a framework for how to work through a resolve. The resolution at the end of the 2AR is just, you can't solve this, which again brings to question the legitimacy of the affirmative.
Yeah, so I think I echo a lot of the negative decisions as well. Obviously, the judge instructions for me are a little bit different, but in the way that they're debated, they don't really materially change the way that I resolve the debate that much. And particularly because the negative is saying interest convergence good, this is a debate where the judge instructions don't change the way that I evaluate the debate that much, to be honest. So they say by the end of the debate, you know, you have offense as far as the way I'm evaluating the debate. You know, I started with I agree with the decisions that have been made about, you know, the race war framing argument. I also think they do have access to the ballot in two ways, both through just the cross-ex about this. I think could have gone a little bit better, for sure. And I agree with Corey that I think you need to choose whether you're committing yourself to the relationality arguments or whether you're saying structures actually do constrain agency instead of agency being primary over structure. So I think you need to sort of make a choice about that. And I thought the inconsistency, I agree with Corey as well, that the inconsistency kind of plagued the shifts from the 2AC to the 1AR to the 2AR. And I thought it left you kind of with a little bit of shifting lines of offense because you were unsure where to commit. So I do think that they have access to the ballot. And I also think that the ballot can, over the long term, if not solve the problem of anti-Blackness in debate and the race war, at least offer some vehicles for mitigation in the form of cultural competency training, experience of contact with people who are different from you and come from different subject positions, and from the experience of code switching with judges, which is something that I'm, you know, just in general very sympathetic to as an argument that's important. I think that you know, a lot of the offense you have in that world is kind of outweighed by uniqueness claims that the negative has. So in particular, you know, you make arguments about, this is going to sound a little bit weird, but you make arguments about sort of like Black women will face toxicity in the post round. And the problem you have is sort of at two levels. One, they have this racial capital in debate DA, which I think is a non-uniqueness argument at the level of debate. And then just at the level of society, to the extent that they're winning, you know, not that they solve the race war, but that at least they help, you know, make debate better informed strategies to fight the race war. They're also winning that, you know, if you don't put Black women in the back of the room, you know, Black women's exhaustion and experience of microaggression is inevitable because white supremacists are going to win, and they'll subject Black women to even worse forms of oppression. So at some level, they're sort of outweighing, not by reading a parallel impact and not by saying Black women's oppression doesn't matter, but by saying they just have a bigger internal link magnitude to which world is going to produce a bigger net reduction in oppression for Black women. And I think by the end of the debate, they're winning that impact calculus. As far as the sort of the part that's more specific to me is the liberal altruism argument. And here, I thought the negative took a path that a lot of people don't take in debate, but that was like pretty hard to answer, which is just like, well, either white people will align with white supremacists or they won't. So which side are you on? Pick your side. And like, for me, that's a pretty easy choice. So, but by the end of that debate, it's like, and for me, I almost feel like the judge instructions are like, they've internal link turned that argument so much that the judge instructions almost make it like impossible for me to vote affirmative, because it's framed in terms of, you're either voting for white supremacy or you're not. So I think you just need a better answer to that argument. And I really think I have sort of two sets of, so I'll say a couple of things. I do sort of resonate with Sri that I am not especially good for genres of argument that are about things that happen like outside of or pre-round. But in this case, it's a totally different situation, because the way that the negative is positioning their argument is not about authenticity or what's in your heart or whatever. Their argument is just like, look, like statistically, here's the evidence we have available to us. We're not saying that you're evil people. We're just saying like, this is really important as a question of political strategy, and like who you have in the back of the room is something you should invest time in changing in your institution. And so for me, I was like, okay, like, I don't know. I think some of these movement building elements are really important at just like a truth level. And I thought their approach to this rhetorically was very different than how I've judged quite a few debates about press sheets. And this is a very different approach, and I thought significantly more effective at pivoting out of some of the answers that you all made. And then, at the level of the relationality stuff, I thought that you all were really getting somewhere with your questions about people of color and the evidence that they're reading, and your questions about what Blackness is because of the rhetoric that their evidence uses to talk about racialization. In the sense that you could say they can't re-raise with sort of like the people of colorblindness style answer because of the evidence that they've read in the debate and because of the way that they've answered some of these questions earlier in the debate. So if I were you, I would lean much more into the relationality element of your ask and move away from the part that says structures constrain what we can do, and question some of the premises that they're raising about saying it's just two sides in the race war, for example, and say, well, it's a little bit, interest convergence is a useful heuristic at some level, but there's more complex alliances and battle lines that exist in particular places. So I don't know, maybe I'm just really thinking about that because in California, I think that's certainly true for how the dynamics of racial politics work, that they're a lot more complicated than just white supremacy versus the people who are fighting white supremacy. But I think that's an argument that you could push back on a little bit more. Then I also think the other argument you could make is just, and this is at two levels. One, their framework for prefs means that Black women end up judging basically every out round. And I think you could make a sort of labor DA at that level that has more uniqueness. I love hearing what debaters have to say, and I love judging interesting debates. And this was certainly one, and all four of you are excellent debaters, so it's great to watch. But like, judging is a pretty brutal experience a lot of the time, and a lot of people don't really want to do it. And it's especially true if you feel like you're being microaggressed constantly, which is not an experience that I have, but I certainly have heard that from many people. And especially if you feel like people are being toxic to you in the post round. So I think that's a way to leverage uniqueness for your offense. And in the second part of this is, you could also say like, well, shouldn't we ask some of these Black women before we put them in the back of the room? Now that does put you in the position of them re-raising and saying, well, did you ask? If you haven't sought out these experiences, then you can't really say that. But there's a flip side to that too. That's like, well, what if Black women don't want to judge our debates? And that's not something they're interested in hearing. Again, you have to be careful about that. And you can't just like recklessly re-raise on the other team. You have to have thought through like, okay, what do we say when they say, well, have you done that? But those are potential lines of argument, I think, that at least get you a little bit more uniqueness, and that raise the question of, should Black women perform this, have to perform all this labor? The same thing potentially is true with the Stacey Abrams DA. I mean, you could criticize that from a social relationality perspective as being sort of the myth of the Black female superhero who has to save democracy from collapse, and that can also be toxic. Again, they will say, well, Black women are already in this space, and learning the cultural competency to speak to them is important. And we're not saying Black women have to save everything, but if you can't communicate to Black women, then you're going to fail. So they do have answers to that, but it's at least a line of attack to try in combination with your other arguments about social relationality and questioning some of these premises. So I think that's a good line of attack as well. Yeah.
I just want to say one thing. Shri and Kennedy Sean said that they're not the best judges for these kind of debates. I am by no means a good judge for any of these debates. I just want to be clear. This is not something that I like look out for, that I like doing. But obviously, if it's a debate that y'all are going to have, it's a debate that y'all are going to have, and so I'm going to try to adjudicate it. But I do just want to say it's equally as uncomfortable for niggas in the back of the room too. It's not like a thing that's not a thing for other people. Nobody wants to decide on shit that happened before the round actually happens. Just a FYI about me.
Yeah, I'll judge any debate. I don't get personally tied up in this stuff. Do your thing. But I will say, I actually think that Dartmouth, y'all kind of waned a little bit on the framework debate. More than I thought. I thought that, this was set up very smartly in the 2AC to be like, look, we're not even playing this game. 2AR is about to be framework. That's what I thought was going to happen. And I thought that if that would have happened, maybe this decision would have looked different, because in my mind, this debate should really be about, look, Fullerton has given you reasons why debate is bad. We don't think that they can structurally change that. The AF has given you debate in its current form, things that we can take out of it, and a reason we can generate a better epistemology. Choose between which one of those is better, right? And then now these ballot arguments, at least for me, now these ballot arguments matter more, right? Because it's like, okay, yeah, Fullerton race war is happening, but can they resolve it? Versus the scholarship the AF is producing, who can actually, whose shit is actually portable. You see what I'm saying? I think, just food for thought.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You're all definitely right about the contradiction between like the relation stuff and then the turns. I did not notice that until after the debate. I thought I needed like a defensive argument and then an offensive argument, and then it didn't catch attention, and then this happened. So that's basically my question was going to be like, which should we lean on? Sean, you answered that. Do you all agree we should lean on the relationality stuff instead of the offense of the ballot stuff?
Yeah, to that point, like I see both ways. Like I also see like Michael's point as well, to just like go all in on the other direction. I think there's ways that you can meld sort of the components of the relationality argument into that. And insofar as like, I think it was a smart choice to talk about, the political implications of particular individuals who adjudicate rounds and how they see the world, and maybe their inclinations or their ideas towards certain things, and whether or not that's something you want to open yourself up to, or you think is like beneficial to the advancement of your scholarship in a way. I don't think that the deployment of it was necessarily like as strategic as it could have been, but I do think that that's an interesting point that you could raise, to kind of just back to the relationality business, is a overemphasis on the political or on sort of the racial and gender identification of judges, and a de-emphasis on sort of the political paradigms. Now, obviously, there's a debate to be had there, but I think you can kind of use the numbers business to your advantage, which is truth claims. There are extremely low amount of Black judges in the pool. Also true, there's an extremely low amount of Black women in the pool. It's also true that all of these people have different political paradigms. We don't just pref all of the white people in a singular way. They're still ordered. There's still, discussions internally about who is and who isn't preferable along those lines, which goes to show that sort of this number evaluation arithmetic becomes a problem in and of itself, and that it reinstitutes itself within sort of these racialized components, or these sort of binaristic views of politics that reduces straight down to the flesh, which turns some of the arguments that they're making about white people being come after by white people too, because it isn't applicable within the realm of debate anymore, right? Like it's only applicable to the outside, which I think gives you the ability to access some of your inside-outside binary business to say that we're the only ones who control sort of the inertia of political will both here and outside in a way that spills over. They confine it and particularize it in moments, in spaces and times that's like beneficial. So I think there's like ways to use the relationality business that isn't just defensive, like it can become offensive too. I do think that given like the nature of your affirmative, that's probably the route I would have, taken. It's just like flexing and shucking, move with the affirmative and use the tools that are there to just like, nah, y'all did that. You said that like there was this fluidity and we can all be allies, and then you said allyship not possible, or accomplishship not possible. You said that like the numbers are super important. We'll re-raise and say that the numbers prove that it's impossible for us to just like blanket accept or pref, people in sort of an egalitarian or equitable manner as you've described. I would just re-raise along those lines and see where the debate goes.
That also makes me think about one part of the debate that didn't really get fleshed out is this conversation of even if you don't control your own prefs, you do have some type of power as a debater and some type of power as a student. I think that that's a place where Fullerton could have probably won a lot more of its solvency claims to creating some kind of change. Is if you push back on this argument that you're making about how even if you don't do your press, if you go to JT or the people on your team that make your press and tell them that you want X, that they'll have to listen to you. And if not, you can escalate that. I think that that's a powerful thing to say and go for as something that can actually create some kind of change for the latter question. Because I think that all of the judges, although 4 of them voted negative, everybody seems unclear about whether or not the ballot or doing anything here would actually create some kind of change for the thing that you're talking about. I don't think any of the 4 judges that voted negative were like 100% on that. And so I think that that's a place where Fullerton probably could have done more to win back some of that solvency. Because I think that the answer of, well, we don't do our prefs is kind of like, I don't know, trying to absolve yourselves of blame, which I think Fullerton's answer is just rightly so, just pushing back and being like, but you do have power as students, but you're choosing not to use it, which is then contextualized around this question of what side do you stand on? Do you just do nothing in the face of, systematic exclusion, or do you take an active stance? And I think that look or that internal link would have done a lot more for you for this larger solvency question.
And correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the judges agreed that argument about I think Barley, you were we just closed out the potential for this even being the possibility of this having an impact, changing people socially. And I did get myself into trouble in cross-ex, right? In terms of that didn't go well. And I feel like it supercharges this argument, right? In terms of, well, then, yeah, the ballot does have some transformative potential. In that cross-ex, I think, I watched the stream after, and yes, it comes across as, if you vote neg, you solve. I didn't mean it to come across that way. In the future, if there's a moment where I get flustered like that, and what I meant to say isn't what I said, or isn't how it came across, do we have advice on,
I feel like the issue is that you can't say what I meant to say was in the 2AR. I feel like it's something you got to clarify immediately after you misspeak, as opposed to when it gets you in trouble. Because then it just comes across as disingenuous.
I guess what I mean is in the moment, I didn't realize I misspoke. But after I watched the round, you know what I mean?
That's kind of the nature of debate. Sometimes
okay, sure, yeah.
the answers you give in cross-ex don't get you into trouble until they
right, do. Yeah. Definitely. Nobody's gonna, ain't no takesies backsies in cross-ex.
All right, yeah.
Nobody's gonna be like, all right, clarification. That's part of what you're saying. That's where, the sneaky competitiveness of it. But don't beat yourself up, about it. We all have made tactical errors and stuff like that. The best piece of advice I can give how to come back is obviously you tried to spin it, but like Carla said, the 2AR is a little bit too late. So if you're spinning it, maybe in the 1AR clarification, maybe, that's a place to start on the flow. Obviously the 1NR hopped all over it. So maybe that should have been something to start that spin a little bit earlier.
A piece of advice I'll add, not in these kinds of debates, but just in debates generally, where there are a lot of things that are happening and you're trying to figure out what's your approach, what your offense is going to be, what are the best defensive claims. I think taking prep before, cross-ex or before you're getting ready for your 2AC or whatever, I think the first thing that you should do is not immediately start like writing on your flow or into your document, here's how we answer this, they say X, we say Y. I think you should take a second and really consider what is the direction that we want to go in responding to these sets of arguments. You know, just like holistically, we know that we have an affirmative, we know what our argument generally is. Which direction do we want to take? Do we want to, you know, sort of try and access a lot of the claims that they're making? Do we want to, you know, mostly go for impact turns? Do we just want to front load on defense and have more of sort of a permutation that's possible for these conversations to coexist and cohabitate? Just like what our general approach is. And I think that informs like everything from, you know, just like your reactions to arguments to the responses and the questions that you're asking in cross-ex. And there's a little bit more synergy and you're capturing exactly what needs to happen. So I think that in those moments of like high anxiety of just like trying to parse through everything, just like slow down a second and really consider like, all right, here's what's been put in front of us. You know, talk to your partner. What do we want to do? Like, what's the best way for us to get to the 2AR that we want to have? And then just like bring it down and go from there.
I think it'll also be helpful for y'all to start the conversation about competition in the 1NC cross-ex. You know, basically, what are the links to the AF? You